Fine, folks, let's settle in and breathe. I know you want answers, you want clarity, and you want that calm, unshakable truth that hits you in the chest and finally makes everything make sense. So here it is, my friends. Without sugar, without noise, without the fake positivity people try to serve you. People don't move on fast because they're healed. They move on fast because they're terrified of sitting alone with who they really are. A person who instantly jumps into something new isn't strong. They're running, they're fleeing the mirror, and nothing exposes a person faster than watching how quickly they try to replace something real. It's like someone dropping a priceless watch into the ocean and immediately buying a plastic toy one from a gas station. It might fill the empty spot on their wrist, but it doesn't replace the value. It doesn't replace the meaning. It doesn't replace the feeling. The truth is, they weren't rejecting you because you lacked value. Stop taking that weight, folks. They pulled away because being truly seen made them uncomfortable. You wanted connection. You wanted something that required maturity, honesty, and intentional effort. They wanted comfort. They wanted shortcuts. They wanted the emotional version of fast food, quick, convenient, and low effort. But fast food never nourishes the soul. It just fills the silence for a moment. My friends, hear this clearly. When someone sprints into another person's arms right after leaving you, they're not healed and they're not done with you. They're avoiding the emotional math that comes with losing something meaningful. A healthy heart doesn't swap people like apps on a phone. A mature mind doesn't go searching for a distraction unless the silence is too loud. You shook them more than their ego could handle, and ego panics fast. That quick move on wasn't strength. It was fear disguised as independence. Ego said, run. The heart whispered, stay. For a moment, ego won, but ego never wins the war. And here's where the story quietly flips. Your rejection didn't break them. It rattled them. It pressed on their insecurities. It exposed the part of them that wasn't ready to grow. And life has a funny way, folks, of circling people right back to the emotions they tried to escape. That rebound, that distraction, that fast move on they were so proud of. It was nothing more than a bandage slapped on a wound they refused to acknowledge, a temporary escape with a long-term cost. Reality always shows up. It always knocks on the door. And right now, reality is collecting its payment. The nights are hitting them harder. The silence doesn't feel peaceful anymore. The distraction doesn't distract like it used to. And the memory of you, the presence of you, the way you treated them, the way you understood them without forcing anything. Yeah, that's creeping back in. Not as nostalgia, as truth. Folks, stay with me. Because the moment someone avoids their feelings, those feelings become louder. The moment someone tries to erase you, your impact becomes sharper. They thought they were escaping you, but all they did was run straight into themselves, and that's a battle they're not winning. So let this sink in, my friends, not gently, but honestly. You were never the fragile one in this whole situation. You were the only one with enough courage to sit with your feelings instead of sprinting from them. You were the only one willing to stand in the truth while they grabbed the nearest escape hatch. People confuse noise with strength, but you showed what real strength looks like, staying grounded when your heart was shaking. That's something most folks can't do. That's why they ran. That's why they distracted themselves. And that's why life is dragging them right back to the lesson they tried to skip. Don't twist this story against yourself ever again. You're the steady one. You're the calm in the chaos. You're the person who chose depth over shortcuts, growth over ego, truth over illusion. And truth, my friends, always wins the long game. Always. It doesn't rush, it doesn't compete, it doesn't panic, it just waits. And then it exposes everything. Their regret is already warming up. Their clarity is already knocking. Their return? Yeah, that part is inevitable. Life makes sure of it. Now here's where I want you to step into your power for real. Don't just listen to this. Don't just nod. Participate in your own comeback. Put your stamp on this moment. Type the words in the comments right now. I choose my worth. Not tomorrow, not later. Right now. Because the version of you who writes that is the version who's done shrinking for people who can't even face themselves. Say it with your chest. Claim it like you finally believe yourself. Live it like a line you refuse to rewrite. And while you're here, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me. You're rebuilding something stronger than what they broke, and I'm not letting you walk this road alone. Number 1. The illusion they escaped you. They thought they slipped away from you, folks, but escaping a person isn't the same as escaping themselves, and deep down they know it. This whole "I moved on instantly" performance they tried to sell to the world was never a sign of emotional strength. It was a sign of emotional avoidance. They didn't walk away with clarity, my friends. They walked away with noise, and noise always fades. Silence never does. This is the part people don't like to admit. When someone leaves quickly, jumps into someone new, or pretends they've replaced you overnight, they're not running from you. They're running from the part of themselves you awakened. Carl Jung said it best without needing poetry. What you deny rules your life. And this person has been living under the shadow of everything they refuse to face. You weren't the thing they wanted to erase. You were the thing they weren't ready to understand. You forced them to confront their emotional limits, their fears of intimacy, their patterns of self-sabotage, and instead of dealing with those inner storms, they just grabbed the first distraction that promised an easier route. It's like someone abandoning a marathon halfway and then bragging about how fast they reached the finish line by taking a taxi. Sure, they got somewhere, but they didn't grow. They didn't build the strength. They didn't earn the peace they're pretending to have. But folks, here's where stoic truth steps in. Distraction is temporary, but the self is permanent. They can numb their mind for a week, a month, even a season, but eventually the truth makes its way back home. It crawls out through the cracks they keep trying to seal, tapping them on the shoulder when they least expect it. And the moment their temporary comfort wears off, the unresolved weight of you drops right back onto their chest. Hard. They tried to outrun a shadow, but the shadow belonged to them. You were just the mirror reflecting it. Right now, you might be asking yourself, if they didn't want to lose me, why didn't they just face their feelings? And that's a fair question, my friends. What you don't see is that facing your feelings requires emotional discipline, a kind of inner maturity that many people never build. It's easier to swipe right than to sit with regret. It's easier to flirt with someone new than to admit they hurt someone who genuinely cared. It's easier to distract themselves than to confront the guilt of walking away from something meaningful. Emotional avoidance always feels easier at first, but like Jung said, the things we avoid eventually turn into our inner tormentors. Think about it this way. Imagine someone putting all their problems into a suitcase and tossing it into the ocean. For a moment, it's gone. They feel lighter. But suitcases float, and eventually that suitcase circles right back to the shore they're standing on. And when they open it, everything they tried to avoid is soaked, heavier, messier, and impossible to ignore. That's exactly the illusion they bought into when they tried to move on fast. They didn't let go. They just delayed the breakdown. You were never the chapter they finished. You were the chapter they abandoned mid-sentence. And that unread ending is haunting them. Humans can't forget what they never understood. We cling to unfinished stories because unfinished stories cling to us. They tried to replace you without resolving you, and unresolved connections echo the loudest in the mind. You might also be wondering, but if they're struggling so much, why aren't they coming back already? Because pride is a stubborn creature, folks. Pride convinces a person that silence will save them from accountability. Pride tells them that admitting they miss you means admitting they were wrong. Pride tells them that reaching back out means confronting everything they tried to outrun. For some people, facing you feels like facing a judge. Not because you're harsh, but because they're finally forced to see their own decisions without the excuses. Their ego convinced them they'd be fine without you. Their heart is now disagreeing, loudly. And here's the psychological part most people never learn. When someone tries to suppress a memory, the brain doesn't delete it. It intensifies it. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They reorganize themselves and come back sharper. Every attempt to block thoughts of you only makes their attachment to you stronger. Every effort to distract themselves only reinforces that you were the deeper connection. Every rebound, every new distraction, every forced smile tears the illusion a little more. Folks, they didn't move on. They fragmented, and life is quietly piecing them back together in a way that forces them to remember what they lost. So don't mistake their silence for peace. Don't mistake their distance for clarity. Don't mistake their rebound for healing. They're fighting an inner war they'll never admit publicly. You were not the storm in their life. You were the calm that scared them because they didn't feel worthy of it. That's why they tried to outrun you, not because you were too little, but because you were too much for someone operating from emotional scarcity. But here's where you take the power back, my friends. Instead of worrying about whether they escaped you, realize that you were the part of their life they couldn't process. You were the lesson they weren't ready to learn. You were the growth they didn't have the strength to face. And while they distract themselves, you rise. While they avoid themselves, you understand yourself. While they numb, you grow. That's why they'll never truly escape you. Growth leaves a permanent mark on those who resist it. And it might hurt now, it might feel unfair, it might make you question your value, but hold steady, stay grounded. You're walking the harder path, but the harder path builds the stronger person. Stoicism teaches you to detach from the reactions of others and lean into the strength of your own character. Jung teaches you that what people run from reveals more about them than what they run toward. Use both truths wisely. Their illusion of escape is just that, an illusion. Yours is becoming awareness, maturity, and inner peace. And that's why in the long run, they're the ones who will break before you ever do. Stay calm, folks. Stay steady, my friends. Their avoidance won't erase what was real. Now anchor this moment into yourself. Type it in the comments with intention. I rise above illusions. Number 2. The crash after the high. Folks, this is the part nobody warns them about. The crash after the high. The moment when all their quick decisions, all their distractions, all their shiny new connections suddenly lose their magic. Because fast moving on is just emotional caffeine. It gives them a temporary buzz, a temporary illusion of progress. But every high has a come down. And when that come down hits, my friends, it hits like a quiet earthquake. No noise, no warning. Just a slow, sinking realization that they didn't upgrade. They downgraded with confidence. In the beginning, everything felt exciting for them. The novelty, the rush, the new attention. They convinced themselves they were doing great. They told themselves they were over you. They posted like they were healed. They smiled like they didn't feel anything. But beneath that surface-level glow was something fragile, something shaky. Think of it like someone trying to light up a dark room with a cheap flashlight. Sure, it shines at first, but the battery drains fast, and suddenly they're left with more darkness than they started with. That's exactly what happens when someone tries to replace depth with speed. Eventually, the dopamine wears off, the rebound stops feeling new, the conversations start repeating themselves, the energy shifts from exciting to empty. That's when the emotional hangover hits them. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's subtle, unsettling, and it creeps up on them exactly when they thought they were safe. And here's the kicker, my friends. The more they tried to run from the memory of you, the faster it finds them in this crash. They start comparing without meaning to. It's instinct, not intention. Human psychology is wired to measure new experiences against old ones, especially ones that left a real emotional imprint. They start noticing little things. The way this new person talks doesn't feel as natural. The way they look at them doesn't carry that familiar warmth. The jokes don't hit the same. The silences feel awkward instead of peaceful. And the connection, no matter how much they hype it up, feels like a cheap imitation of something they once had, effortlessly with you. Folks, this is where missing you begins. Not when they left, not when they blocked you, not when they posted their fake happiness online. Missing you begins the moment the illusion cracks, the moment they realize they didn't heal, they replaced, they didn't process, they escaped, they didn't choose better, they chose easier, and easier never survives long. They begin to notice how you made them feel understood without explanation. How you didn't just listen, you listened in a way that made them feel seen. How your presence didn't demand effort. How your energy didn't drain them but grounded them. These aren't things they can replicate with someone new. These aren't traits they can force. These are qualities tied to who you are, not what you did. And that's what shakes them. This new connection, this so-called upgrade, starts feeling like a bootleg copy of something authentic. It's like buying a knockoff brand, hoping no one notices. But they notice. They notice every little difference. And the more the glow fades, the more the truth shines through. There comes a moment where they sit with themselves and think, why doesn't this feel right? And silence answers. Silence always tells the truth they tried to avoid. The truth that they didn't get over you. The truth that the real connection didn't leave their system. The truth that their heart is still wired to something they tried to disconnect from too quickly. They thought moving on fast would save them, but healing doesn't rush. Growth doesn't sprint. Trying to leap over your emotions only guarantees that you land in them harder later, and that's where they are now, face to face with everything they ran from. This crash isn't your failure, it's their reality check. It's life handing them the bill for every shortcut they took. And trust me, they feel the weight. Stand tall through this, my friends. Their confusion is not your burden. Their regret is not your responsibility. Their emotional crash is simply the universe balancing the scales. Anchor yourself now. Type it in the comments. I am the standard. Number 3. the psychological snap when reality hits. Folks, this is the moment the mask finally slips, the part no one posts about, no one brags about, and no one admits to, not even to their closest friends. It's the psychological snap, that quiet, internal collapse that shows up when reality stops being polite and starts being painfully honest. This isn't a dramatic movie scene. It's not tears on the bathroom floor. It's something far harder, the mind turning against itself. The ego and the heart finally facing each other in the same room with no escape route. And my friends, that's where everything unravels. It always starts small, a thought they can't shake, a discomfort they can't explain, a softness in their chest that wasn't there yesterday. They'll brush it off at first, pretending they're fine, pretending that their decision made sense, pretending that the life they chose away from you is stable. That's the ego talking, the part of the mind that refuses to admit mistakes, refuses to show vulnerability, refuses to acknowledge regret. But the heart? The heart has no interest in protecting pride. The heart just tells the truth. And when the heart whispers, if you made the right decision, then why do you still think about them? The ego panics. That's cognitive dissonance, two realities colliding, two internal truths contradicting each other, two versions of themselves fighting for dominance. One says, I moved on. The other says, then why does their memory still live rent-free in your chest? This mental conflict is brutal, folks. It's the emotional version of trying to walk in two directions at once. At first, it feels like mild confusion. Then it escalates into anxiety, then into self-doubt, then into a full-blown internal war where their thoughts wander back to you no matter how far they try to run. Every memory of you becomes heightened, sharper, brighter, louder. They remember things they haven't thought about in months, the way you laughed at the smallest things, the way you understood unspoken emotions, the way your presence felt steady, grounding, familiar. They start replaying moments in their mind like a movie stuck on repeat. Not because they want to, but because their subconscious refuses to let go of what still matters. This is where life gets poetic in the most inconvenient way. Suddenly, every place they go reminds them of you, not because the place changed, but because they did. A street you once walked together hits them with nostalgia. A restaurant you mentioned randomly pops into their thoughts. A scent, a song, a phrase. Everything becomes a reminder. The world transforms into a reflection of the connection they tried to bury. And the songs, folks, the songs hit differently. Music has a way of bypassing ego altogether. One lyric, one melody, and boom, your memory spills back into their chest like a flood they can't control. They might try to skip the track, but even that becomes a reminder. The mind has a cruel sense of humor during regret. Then comes the quiet moments, the killer, the silence that strips away all distractions. No noise, no rebound, no friends, no scrolling, no pretending, just them and their thoughts. That's when the truth reveals itself with absolute clarity. They didn't move on, they malfunctioned, they emotional shortcutted themselves into a corner, they tried to cheat the healing process, and healing doesn't play those games. Reality becomes a mirror they can't look away from, and what they see isn't flattering. They see the impulsiveness, the panic, the ego-driven choices. They see that the peace they were chasing wasn't peace. It was avoidance dressed up as confidence. And the snap happens. A crack in the illusion, a break in the armor, a moment where even they can't deny that something inside them still belongs to you. This isn't karma. This is psychology. When someone tries to suppress an emotional attachment, the attachment strengthens. When someone avoids the truth becomes louder. When someone refuses to process loss, the loss processes them. And that's exactly what's happening now. They're not suffering because you wanted them to. They're suffering because their choices finally caught up to their conscience. They didn't move on. They malfunctioned. And now their mind is forcing them to face the truth they thought they could outrun. Breathe, my friends. Stay grounded. Let their internal war remind you of your internal growth. Let their confusion remind you of your clarity. Anchor this moment into strength. Type it in the comments, I rise with truth. Number 4. Why their moving on was never about you. Folks, this part right here is where everything finally makes sense. The part most people overlook because they're too busy blaming themselves, replaying the breakup, or wondering what they could have done differently. But, my friends, listen closely. Their so-called moving on was never a statement about your value. It was a statement about their limits. Their choices weren't shaped by your shortcomings. They were shaped by their own emotional shortcuts. You weren't the problem. They were simply unprepared for someone with your level of depth, honesty, and presence. When someone runs from a real bond, they're not saying, you aren't enough. They're saying, I'm not ready for what this demands of me. And that's something most folks never admit out loud. Facing a real connection requires emotional muscle, self-awareness, vulnerability, patience, maturity. Some people haven't even lifted the emotional equivalent of a 2-pound dumbbell, yet here you were offering them something that required strength and stability. No wonder they folded. No wonder they panicked. No wonder they grabbed the first easy exit. You didn't get rejected, you got avoided. There's a difference. People who move on fast aren't making a conscious decision. They're reacting like someone slapping a bandage on a wound without even checking how deep it is. The rebound, the sudden new person, the quick distractions. Those are not intentional paths. Those are fear responses. It's emotional first aid applied by someone who doesn't even know where the real bleeding is coming from. Think of it like this, folks. Imagine someone being handed a deep, meaningful book, one filled with wisdom, complexity, and soul. And instead of reading it, they toss it aside and choose a children's coloring book because it's easier. Less complicated, less confronting. That's what happened with you. You weren't too much. You were simply too real for someone used to emotional shortcuts. They weren't choosing someone better. They were choosing someone who didn't challenge their unhealed parts. Because let's be honest, my friends, depth exposes what's shallow. Real connection exposes insecurities. Emotional intimacy exposes every wall a person thought they built successfully. And when someone hasn't done the inner work, that exposure feels terrifying. Not because you were wrong for them, but because being with you required them to face things within themselves they spent years avoiding. This is why their moving on was never a choice. It was an escape route. They didn't pick someone over you. They picked comfort over growth. They picked easy over meaningful. They picked numbness over truth. And we all know how that story ends. Easy fades fast, temporary cracks under pressure. Meaningful things echo long after they're gone. You might ask yourself, but if they valued me, why didn't they stay and try? Folks, value isn't the issue. Capacity is. You can value something deeply, but still lack the capacity to hold it. Ever seen someone desperately want a dream job, but not have the skills? Or want to fix their life, but not have the discipline? Or want to be healthier, but not have the consistency? That's what happened here. They wanted the feeling, but not the work. They wanted the closeness, but not the vulnerability. They wanted you, but they weren't equipped for someone like you. Their fast move on wasn't about you. It was about the emotional weight they weren't strong enough to carry. And here's the part that stings for them. Temporary connections don't stand a chance against the impact of a real one. When they panic pick someone easier, they're not choosing compatibility, they're choosing escape. But escape always ends where it began, with the truth. And eventually they'll realize that everything they were running from was inside themselves, not you. You were just the mirror reflecting it. So hold your head high, my friends. Their emotional detour does not define your worth. Their fear does not diminish your value. Their avoidance does not rewrite the depth you brought into their life. Let this moment ground you, not break you. Type it in the comments. I honor my depth. Number 5. The quiet nights they can't outsmart. Folks, this is the part they never outrun, no matter how fast they pretend life is moving. The quiet nights, the hours when the world finally goes still and every distraction they piled on top of their feelings falls apart like wet paper. People can fake strength in the daylight because the world gives them noise to hide behind. But darkness? Darkness is honest. Darkness is direct. Darkness tells the truth they've been ducking since the moment they let you go. And my friends, that truth doesn't whisper. It hits like a slow, unstoppable tide. When night falls and their mind has nowhere left to sprint, that's when it begins. The remembering, the replaying, the revisiting of every moment they swore they wouldn't think about again. Your laugh shows up first. Soft, unexpected, impossible to shake. Then your presence, the way you made the room feel lighter just by existing in it. The way you made them relax without forcing themselves into any version of perfection. They remember how they felt around you, safe, understood, seen. And folks, feeling seen is rare. People don't forget that, not even when they try with everything they have. They lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering why the silence feels heavier now, wondering why the person they ran to isn't enough to fill the void you left. Wondering why the memories they tried to bury are rising back up with more force than before. That's the irony of emotional avoidance. The more you run, the louder the thing you're running from becomes. You don't disappear in the silence, you become amplified. And trust me, they notice the difference. They notice how the person they rush toward doesn't feel like home, doesn't feel familiar, doesn't feel natural. They notice the way the new connection demands constant effort just to maintain a feeling that came effortlessly with you. Folks, this is when the comparisons start hurting them, not because the new person is bad, but because the truth is clear. Comfort can't be manufactured. Chemistry can't be imitated. Depth can't be duplicated. So they lay there and replay the things you did that no one else does. How you remembered their small details, how you understood their unspoken moods, how you made them feel valued without needing validation, how you laughed at their jokes in a way that made them feel like the world wasn't so heavy. These aren't memories, they're anchors. Anchors that keep pulling them back to the connection they tried to escape. And they hate it. They hate that the silence is telling the truth. They hate that moving on didn't erase you. They hate that every attempt to forget you only made the emotional imprint deeper. They hate that the rebound glow faded, but the memory of you didn't. It's frustrating them, confusing them, humbling them. And yes, it's breaking them a bit. Because the truth isn't just creeping in, it's multiplying. One memory triggers another. One feeling unlocks 10 more. One thought leads to a full emotional avalanche. They start asking themselves questions they avoided at the beginning. Why do I still care? Why can't I shake this? Why does it feel like something's missing? Why does the quiet feel lonelier without them? Folks, they don't miss you because they're weak. They miss you because you mattered, because you were real in a world full of half-hearted connections, because you didn't make them perform, because you didn't love them in a conditional, performative, transactional way. You loved them in a way that had weight, meaning, depth. That kind of love echoes. It leaves fingerprints on a person's life, and silence just makes those fingerprints glow. So when the quiet nights hit, that's when everything catches up. That's when the pretending stops. That's when the truth starts speaking. And that's when they finally realize that they didn't just lose a person. They lost the version of themselves they felt safe being around you. Let this strengthen you, my friends. Let it remind you that your presence leaves echoes deeper than their pride. And anchor this moment by typing it in the comments. I am unforgettable. Number 6. The comparison game they lost. Folks, this is the part they really don't want to admit. Not to themselves, not to their friends, not to the world. The comparison game. And let me tell you straight, they never stood a chance of winning it once they chose to replace depth with convenience. They walked away thinking the grass was greener, that someone better was waiting out there, someone easier, someone lighter, someone who didn't make them confront their inner mess. But life has a brutal sense of humor, my friends. It doesn't hand out upgrades to people who run from growth. It hands out reality checks. When the new connection entered their life, it felt exciting. New always does, but new is not the same as better. New doesn't mean aligned. New doesn't mean deep. New simply means unfamiliar. At first, anything unfamiliar feels interesting because the brain lights up with novelty, but novelty wears off. And when it does, what's left is the truth, the standard you set without ever trying. They didn't leave thinking you were worthless. They left assuming they'd find someone who could replicate what you gave them, with less effort and less emotional accountability. They believed connection was a plug-and-play experience. They believed closeness was replaceable. They believed your presence could be swapped out like a phone charger. Folks, let them have that delusion. Reality corrected it fast. Here's where psychology steps in. There's a concept called contrast bias. The brain is constantly comparing new experiences to old ones, especially ones that held emotional meaning. Your voice, your empathy, your timing, your humor, your emotional intelligence, your ability to read the room, your ability to steady someone without saying much. These things weren't random. They were rare. And now, every time this new person doesn't measure up in one of those areas, the brain highlights the difference like a flashing neon sign. They start noticing things they never appreciated while you were around. How your calm rubbed off on them, how your presence made their anxiety feel smaller, how your conversations had layers, not just surface-level chatter. How your kindness felt genuine instead of performative. They notice how the new person handles conflict, how they handle silence, how they respond when things get tough. And suddenly, you keep winning without even being there. That's the painful part for them. The loss isn't loud, it's slow, it's quiet, it's cumulative. It builds with every moment they realize the new connection isn't hitting the same emotional notes. It's like switching from a beautifully composed song to a poorly tuned instrument. You can pretend the melody is fine, but your ear knows the truth. And here's the deeper truth. They weren't looking for someone better. They were looking for someone easier, but easier comes with a low ceiling. Easier doesn't challenge them to grow. Easier doesn't make them confront their patterns. Easier doesn't shake their soul. You did. You were the one who brought emotional gravity into their life. And now they're stuck with someone who feels light in the worst way, weightless, hollow, forgettable. They may try to convince themselves they're happy. They may post pictures. They may talk big. They may pretend you're irrelevant, but the comparison game runs silently in the back of their mind, and every time something feels off, every time something feels shallow, every time something feels mismatched, your memory steps forward like a quiet reminder of what connection actually felt like. It's not your job to win. You already did. You won the moment they realized they couldn't replicate you. You won the moment contrast made everything clear. You won when they finally understood they didn't choose better. They chose emptiness, disguised as convenience. Stand tall in that truth, my friends. You didn't lose anything. You were the benchmark. You were the experience. You were the presence that changed the way they see people, and that kind of impact doesn't fade. It echoes. Now claim it. Type it in the comments. I set the standard. Number 7. The regret loop they can't escape. Folks, this is where their whole internal universe starts folding in on itself. The regret loop. And trust me, my friends, this loop is not gentle. It doesn't tap on their shoulder. It drags them into a cycle they can't escape, no matter how much they pretend they've moved on. Regret never shows up all at once. It's smarter than that. It arrives in waves, slow, subtle, and strategic. The first wave is curiosity, the soft, quiet voice that asks, "I wonder how they're doing." They tell themselves it's harmless, that they don't care, that it's just a passing thought. But curiosity is never just curiosity. It's the beginning of truth resurfacing. The second wave is nostalgia, and nostalgia is a beast. Nostalgia doesn't remind them of the fights, the problems, or the mistakes. No, nostalgia only shows the highlights, the warm moments, the laughter, the comfort, the parts of the connection they took for granted. Nostalgia shows them the version of you they didn't appreciate when they had the chance, and that's when something inside them shifts. They realize those moments weren't normal, they weren't replaceable, they were rare. Then comes guilt, and guilt is where the loop tightens around their chest. They start replaying their choices, their words, the way they walked away without thinking twice. They start questioning themselves. Did I give up too quickly? Did I misjudge their intentions? Did I throw away something I wasn't mature enough to handle? And folks, guilt is unforgiving. It forces them to confront the truth. They weren't disciplined enough to handle a real connection. They didn't lose interest. They lost control over their impulses. They lost emotional discipline. They lost their ability to stay grounded when things got real. And now the consequences are sitting with them in silence. After guilt comes longing, and longing is the heaviest wave of all. Longing crawls into their chest late at night when the room is dark and their thoughts are loud. Longing shows them the empty spaces, spaces that their rebound, their distractions, their temporary connections will never fill. This is when they start checking your socials, quietly, secretly, carefully. They don't like feeling exposed, so they stalk from the shadows, refreshing your page, scanning your likes, zooming in on your photos as if clarity lives in the pixels. They start asking mutual friends about you, but casually, always pretending it's nothing, always pretending they're just curious. But curiosity that shows up every week, That's not curiosity anymore. That's attachment resurfacing. They want to know if you're talking to someone new. They want to know if you seem happier. They want to know if you're living your life without them. And folks, that question stings them the most. Have they moved on? Because if you have, that's when the regret hits hardest. They're scared to admit this regret out loud, so they do what most people do. They watch from afar. They stalk your stories. They watch your updates. They read into your captions. They quietly try to piece together the life you're living now. And every time they see you smiling, glowing, elevating, that regret loop tightens around them even more. They thought leaving would give them freedom. Instead, it gave them a front row seat to their biggest mistake. And here's the part they can't tell anyone. They know now that you were always the one with emotional backbone, the one who cared with intention, the one who was stable when they were chaotic, the one who saw them clearly when they couldn't even see themselves. Losing you didn't expose anything about your flaws. It exposed their lack of discipline, their lack of emotional maturity, their lack of consistency. People don't miss the ones who were easy to forget. They miss the ones who challenged them to grow. So that loop keeps spinning. Curiosity, nostalgia, guilt, longing, repeat. They can't escape it because it's not a phase. It's the truth trying to bury itself into their awareness. You weren't just a chapter. You were the book they weren't ready to finish. And now they know it. Anchor this power into yourself, my friends. Type it in the comments. I was the one. Number 8. Why they eventually come back to the one they underestimated. Folks, here we are, the part everyone secretly waits for but doesn't want to admit out loud. The return. Not the fantasy version, not the Hollywood script, but the psychological, predictable, almost unavoidable truth. People circle back to what they underestimated, especially when what they underestimated was depth. And my friends, you were depth. You were substance in a world obsessed with surface-level thrills. You were real in a time where most people are just performing versions of themselves to look lovable. People don't forget real. They don't replace real. They just wander until reality humbles them enough to see what they lost. When someone mishandles a genuine connection, it doesn't disappear. It waits. It lingers in the back of their mind like an unfinished conversation. Humans are wired to seek familiarity, emotional safety, and meaning. And whether they tell themselves the truth or not, that's what they had with you. Maybe they didn't recognize it at the time. Maybe they weren't mature enough to receive it. Maybe their ego convinced them they deserved something better, whatever that means. But here's what life teaches all of us sooner or later. There is no better version of authenticity. Authenticity is one of one. People don't return because they're bored. They return because the world reminded them of what they took for granted. They return because life handed them a few lessons they didn't want to learn. They return because the person they thought was an upgrade exposed their own emotional underdevelopment. They return because depth feels like home, and once you've experienced that kind of home, every other place feels temporary, empty, airy, unreal. Think about it this way, my friends. Imagine someone leaving a quiet lake to chase a flashy ocean full of waves and noise. At first, it's exciting, loud, stimulating, but eventually the exhaustion hits. The waves become overwhelming, the noise becomes draining, and suddenly the calm lake they left behind becomes the image they crave when life gets too heavy. You were that lake. You were peace disguised as a person. You were the place their soul rested, even when their mind didn't understand why. They return to that. They always do. Because people don't stay with distractions once the illusion breaks. They don't stay with shallow connections once the comparisons start. They don't stay with temporary comfort once the emotional bill shows up. They come back to truth. They come back to the person who didn't make them perform. They come back to the one who made them feel seen without having to pretend. They come back to the connection that didn't exhaust them. They come back to the energy that felt grounding instead of draining. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. They didn't leave because they lost feelings. They left because they didn't know how to hold the feelings they had. You were too real for someone who only ever practiced artificial love. They weren't emotionally prepared, emotionally trained, or emotionally mature enough to handle the weight of something meaningful. So they ran. But running doesn't erase the heart. Running only delays the truth. And the truth is simple, folks. They didn't heal. They didn't replace you. They didn't outgrow you. They just distracted themselves long enough to pretend. And distraction has an expiration date. When the loneliness hits, when the silence gets too loud, when the comparisons drain them, when the reality of their choices breaks through the denial. That's when the return begins, quietly, slowly, hesitantly, with guilt, with awareness, with humility. And whether or not you take them back isn't the point. The point is, they come back because life forces them to confront every part of themselves they ignored when they walked away. They come back because your connection didn't die, it just waited. They come back because their heart never actually left you. Only their ego did. Here comes the part we wrap this journey up, folks. After everything we've uncovered, one truth stands tall. You weren't the one who broke. You were the one who woke up. They ran, they avoided, they crashed, and they circled right back to the truth you always carried. Stand firm in your worth, stay steady in your growth, and let life bring back whoever was meant to understand you. If this opened your eyes, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs it. Stay grounded, my friends.